because the money that's supposed to be pumped into the sectors are used, are abused, and are used ineffectively. Secondly, economic accountability. There will definitely be effective economic accountability if the system of governance is adopted, because every level of government will be able to give reports consistently of what they have been able to use this money for, of what they have been able to use the government money for, of what they have been able to achieve so far. Again, if we support this model of governance, we will be able to have a good policing force, a good security force, where common Nigeria where people will be able to have a good policing force, where security is prioritized. Accepted.
So in current status quo, local government and states already have power. They prefer the necessity to devolve more powers to them.
Devolve more powers to them. Local governments have powers, but the powers are not enough. I am saying that we should centralize these powers by trying to give them higher percentage, by trying to give them enough authority to be on their own, to be able to use this money, to be able to use the government money, to be able to do things on their own without being influenced by the federal system of government. Because currently in Nigeria, the local government cannot just wake up and wants to do anything without the federal authority trying to approve all this. Back to what I was saying. Security currently in Nigeria is at a very high rate because security is not prioritized. But if we adopt this model, not accepted, if we adopt this model of governance, there will be enough employment opportunities for security personnel in the country. People would come out to be employed as security personnel. There will be enough to go around in other sectors. But in the federal level currently now, the number of police officers that are being transported are not enough. And the government will always complain that they do not have enough money to employ these individuals. So this House should therefore support the motion that adoption of fractal autonomy is as the model of governance in Nigeria. Thank you.
House thanks the Prime Minister for that speech. We are going to welcome the leader of opposition to open the case for side opposition. Here. Yes, a minute. Please, the minute is speaking.
Tells you in this debate is that they fail to give you a context as to what this debate actually entails, right? So let's quickly do that. We think that Nigeria currently has a lot of problems that it currently faces or it currently undergoes, right? So things like problems of representation, things like, chain and complex commands and all of that, right? But then the question now becomes, if we now further decentralize, because we do have a united front already, we still have these decentralized things that they still talk about. The problem then becomes, if we then decentralize to the point where they talk about, is that necessarily the solution? We think that in a country like Nigeria, where we still have diverse ethnicities and a lot of things that are on a more divided scale, what Nigeria then needs is a very strong center. What dialogue means is that you do not get that strong center in itself, right? And then we're going to tell you why it's important as my speech goes on. Now, the first level of thing that we want to engage on is basically our point, right? Is level of accountability. So what it looks like is, if we're able to create a certain level of system where everybody is on the same level of equality, so what it means is that state government has centralized power, they have a centralized police, they have a tax force, they have a this, they have a that. Everybody has a certain level of equality of power. What it looks like that they hold in themselves. What that now looks like is that you're not able to necessarily say, oh, this person is wrong. It's simple, right? If there are two people living in a particular house, and we know that, the mother can come and say, oh, this person, you're in charge, right? Because it means that that other person is obviously accountable to that person. But if the mother says, oh, two of you are on the same level, two of you can give important rules, two of you are the owners of these things, all at the same level. But it looks like it's like if I do something wrong, you're not able to call me out on it. And even if you do call me out on it, I have no, there's nothing that would necessarily ginger me to want to listen to you or want to necessarily take in these things that you tell me. Why is this important? Because we think that the INFOSLIDE tells us one thing, that we want to be able to control the legal framework that we want to be able to control framework that exists in Nigeria. If we want to do that, what we then need to do is that we need to have all these people, we need to be able to link them, we need to be able to have them contribute to what makes up Nigeria. When we have what we talk about, what that means is that we have different systems, we have different people that talk on different things. We're not able to have that situation where all these people are necessarily able to link into what we want Nigeria to look like. We think we want Nigeria to look like a place where we have a standard united front. We're not able to do that on this side of the house. Why? Because it looks like these people have different things, these people have different ideologies, and even if we have one person fuck up, what that then means is that we're not able to get another person who is able to hold that person accountable on that level of fuck up, right? But then why exactly is that important? Because we think that also at the global stage, we think that at the global stage, what that now looks like is, if a president or an investor or something wants to come into Nigeria to give maybe better employment opportunities or better infrastructure, as the case may be, what it looks like is that these people need a certain level of person that they can meet and be like, oh, this is the person in charge, this is the person I should meet with, this is the person I should talk to, so that I'm able to do or engage the level of investment or opportunities that I want to bring forward in this country. If we're not able to get that level of centralized support, like it's simple, even currently in Nigeria, right? We know that if a certain level of high investor or so, they have a specific person that they are able to meet. In their world, what it looks like is that people have different governments, people have different leaders, right? There is no incentive for me to want to know that, oh, this is the person in charge, this is the person I need to go and meet, and this is the person that will really help me for the caterment of investment opportunities and employment opportunities that I want to bring into this country.
Alright, so not everybody ends up fucking up, right? At the end of the day, some leaders have an incentive to do the right thing because they have more proximity to the people.
Okay, so very, very, very importantly, right? Very importantly. Now, this is maybe directly linked to what people tell you. They tell you that, we need to be able to create one level of employment and infrastructure opportunities. Why? Because there's already corruption that already exists, right? And then if we don't give more powers to these other sectors, what it looks like is that, we're able to create one level of better opportunities. Corruption exists with every high-end leader. Majority of these leaders, even if people using other countries, Nigeria in itself is an example of that. The only reason why we're not able to hold this level of other people in local governments and all those things accountable, right, is because people don't really care about what happens in those countries, in those states. But it looks like people are not concerned with the level of corruption that occurs on a federal basis. It's simple. If you already know that the federal government is corrupt, if you give other people more power, what it looks like is that you only create room for more corruption with these leaders. It's simple. If somebody does not have enough, if somebody has current money or they get a certain level of revenue, and local government now currently gets a certain level of local revenue. When you give this person more power, you give them more opportunities. What it looks like is that you only give them more reason to continue to want to continue to. Like it's simple. If I give somebody this level of high-end power, there's always a thought, there's always a necessity that comes to me that, I have this level of opportunities at my disposal. I can do with them whatever I like, right? The one that they cater for is 1% of the 1%. We're focusing on Nigeria currently, where we actually have these corruptions and we actually have these problems in scope, right? You need to tell us why exactly the world is going to be important to be able to fix that, right? Now, second level of argument, right, is that we think that these local governments already have enough power as it exists. What that means is that, yes, we understand that there is a problem of they still need to be able to be held accountable by, they still need to submit to state governments, federal governments, and all of that. But then we think that these people already have some level of power in itself. It's simple. If I give you a certain level of power and I say that you can only activate this territory, you need to have shown me why, you have done that job so well, and because of that, I cannot be able to give
House thanks the leader of opposition for our speech. We welcome the Deputy Prime Minister to round up opening comments. Please, here.
Good evening, panel.
Did you collect let's see. Not the name,
The mic.
the mic. Okay, they are not using
The mic is on.
Okay.
Yeah, so good evening, panel, members of the parliament. I am Solomon Yenifabe, I'm sitting as the deputy member of the opening government. I'm here to propose the motion which says that this house supports the adoption of fractal autonomy as a model of governance in Nigeria. As the leader of opposition have earlier mentioned, that it's better to have a strong center than having divided power. But have you heard of the saying that says two hands are better than one? She also mentioned that having the same power in a country gives room for corruption and all that. But if you hear us say the same level of power, imagine this country as a business or as a body. The owner of that business has 100% shares. What good will it do to him if he's the only one working? But instead, there are other members who get shares in those companies. That also means that they have parts, they have roles to play, they have things to do, that will take care of that company. Not taking the fact that he, as the owner, has a higher share, which means he is in control of what happens. Even though the other have powers, but he is in control of their actions. He checks through their deeds, he checks what they do, and he knows all that goes on there. Now, coming to my point, in the country, sharing of powers, decentralizing of powers, it increases or enhances accountability, as earlier mentioned by the Prime Minister. As earlier mentioned, it increases and enhances accountability. By this, as I earlier mentioned, control. The government have control over the funds. The government have control over the finances. These are then shared to the local government and state government, which therefore provide amenities for people that the government at the height of can't reach. It thereby provides amenities like water, food, clothing for those who can't afford, educational system and healthcare for those that the government can't reach at the higher level. It also increases development, creating of new jobs, as she mentioned earlier. Creating of new jobs, development, economic development, where there's money shared around or power shared to the state government, to the local government, even to the chairman, etc.
Okay, so every level of government already has corruption in itself, right? You're talking about how your world will create more opportunities. How would that do that? If I give these people more money, you obviously have more tendency to continue being more corrupt. Is that like, it doesn't make sense?
Corruption has always been there. Corruption will still be there. The main thing you should be talking about is you curbing this corruption, trying to reduce its level. Giving power to them to control it does not only increase the corruption, but it also provides ways, as earlier mentioned by the Prime Minister, about security. There are security measures taken to curb this corruption. There are security measures taken to protect the innocent people that do not have the ways to protect themselves.
Given it's likely going to be the same political actors in both worlds, why do you achieve all those positives you talk about?
Having the same political factors, as we know presidential terms, after a particular time, they change, bringing new elected people into positions, which give them new and upper hands, which give them more advantages, which oppose opportunities of security, opportunities of jobs, economic development, and all other perspectives. Then it also reduces dependence of the people on the government. Having problems, when problems arise, maybe in the lower sector, you have to run to the federal government, you have to run to the people at the top. But when you have power shared to the states, to the local government, there is no need for you to stress yourself going to the top. But you have the opportunity, you have the liberty to go to the local government. You have the opportunity to go to the state government. You have the opportunity, if you are the high top, to then go to the federal government. Rather than from the lower, you want straight going up. So this enables the flow, the movement of things, as I said earlier, economic development, bringing revenue, bringing money, bringing opportunities, different opportunities. She had mentioned investment. Yes, investment comes in different ways. You not only invest in those that are in control, but also invest in others. For example, you don't invest only in your brain, since the brain controls the body. At least you buy lotions to take care of your hands, you buy lotions to take care of your skin, you take drugs to take care of your body. You don't just go straight to the brain, because you going to the brain does not mean everything is in control. It does not mean everything will remain the same. It does not mean everything will be better. There are things to take to the brain which does not improve the health alone. The brain has a limit of its function. Each other thing has their own functions. That is why I urge this house today to accept and take this, to accept and support that the adoption of fractal autonomy as a model of government in Nigeria should be adopted. The adoption of fractal autonomy in Nigeria should be taken seriously and implemented so that it will make or improve the betterment of this country called Nigeria. It will make the betterment of this country and the betterment of the people living in it. Our lives in different sectors, those in poverty, they'll be elevated. Those in wretchedness, they'll be elevated, providing amenities for them like in agriculture, health-wise, and other ways. Thank you.
House thanks the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech. Welcome the leader of the Deputy Leader of Opposition to round up the entire open house. Sorry, before you continue, is there light here that we can Dear Lord, when you were ready.
I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, there's a burden on every single government team in today's debate to defend the necessity to devolve extra powers to both the local government and state government. But it's not just any normal extra power we're talking about in today's debate. The INFOSLIDE is very clear. Critical functions, things like the ability to tax your people that live in your state the way you want, the ability to create a police for them and manage that police however they want, and thirdly, very, very importantly, is the the ability to generate revenue by yourself and manage that revenue by yourself. We think that you do a couple of things to the remaining members of other states, but most importantly, right, we think that there's already a large amount of representation. Inclusive government is going to come here and argue 3 things. They're going to talk about representation, proximity, and try to extend on accountability. I'm going to show you why none of that's going to work in today's debate. The first thing here, right, let's understand how state governments and local governments already work. State governments can perform a ton of executive functions already in status quo. It can make laws, it can make appointments, it can manage elections, all of those types of things. There's no necessity to devolve things like taxation, revenue generation to these people. But then what does independent control actually look like on the side of the house? It means, first of all, you don't need to report to a higher authority. So as a state governor, you have total jurisdiction over your state. You have the ability to make all these laws. You don't need to report to any higher authority. We think the step-down impact of this, which I'm going to analyze later, is that a lot of minorities within states are going to become very, very disadvantaged. Put your hand down. But then secondly, right, you get to make the laws based on the majority view in that state. This extends to my impact on what the minorities in that state are going to face. Because note, Nigeria is far from homogeneous. My partner gives you this analysis and framing. It is very important that the minorities within Nigeria are well catered for. In this current system, right, the federal system, this is the only system where you get that amount of benefits. On the other side of the house, you spread the powers to people who own the majority stake in that state, and they are most likely not going to be able to take care of the minorities within that state. Let's talk about why fractal autonomy is actually bad, right? We think that because of the characterization my partner has given you about how Nigeria is already divided on several lines, ethnic lines, religious lines, what you do on the side of the house is that you institutionalize this division. What it looks like in status quo is that majority of the time, people say that, okay, this is a Christian state, this is a Muslim state, but it is not in the constitution. It is not what is allowed legally. What you do
very key idea in the motion, which is revenue generation. These guys no longer depend on the federal government for allocation and all those kind of things.
Yeah, that's like the whole point, right? You generate your own revenue. What happens in a situation when you are not able to generate that revenue? There are a ton of states in Nigeria that do not have agricultural produce, that do not have crude oil, that don't have all these things to export. They don't cater for these people on their side of the house. But then let's talk about the entirety of closing of government's rights. What they're going to say is that, oh, we're going to get better representation and proximity to the people, which automatically translates to accountability. Panel, it does not. And my doctor showed you, right? Your local government chairman is in his office right now, but you do not know him. Because you're giving him more powers, it doesn't automatically mean you're going to know him, you're going to want to hold him accountable. Accountability exists in a world when people are actually connected to their state and want to improve. On both sides of the house, that's very possible. Every side of the house can argue accountability in today's debate. It's not an exclusive benefit when you give them more powers. But secondly, right, the worst part about accountability is that there's no federal government to hold them accountable because you devolve the power from the center to the state. So the states are now independent. They can do whatever it is they like. They don't need to report back to the state. The president can no longer have this amount of power that they normally have in status quo. But thirdly, right, on the other side of the house, minorities get marginalized for that because look, in a state like Rivers State, there's a majority and there are minority states. The Korean people, the Ghanaian people, all these people are minorities within Rivers State. Those people are most likely going to be marginalized further. So all their chat about representation doesn't cater to these minorities. It's only when there's a federal system you do so. But why is a strong central government necessary? Because that security issues can be uniquely tackled by a strong federal system. On the side of the house, with devolved powers, so imagine a state like Borno being left alone to tackle Boko Haram. You need to provide that something that's going to happen. But then secondly, you can't much harder to attract things like foreign investment. You need a very, very strong center to be able to attract foreign investment into your country because they see that you're a strong center. You can easily make unified decisions. That unity doesn't exist on the side of the house. But then thirdly and most importantly, further divide Nigeria by enshrining it in the law. There's nothing you get from our case. You need to get the fact that schools is very, very important that we keep Nigeria as united as possible. We only do that on our side of the house.
House came to get people that were competent for a stage, we welcome the member of government to open the case for closing the government.
Give my speech in 3, 2, 1. Alright, panel. Get a very messy debate in the opening half, mostly because of the poor characterization that our opening gave as to what the INFOSLIDE directly tells you. 3 key things that are totally ignored by these guys, right? First and foremost, these guys are in control of revenue generation. What this looks like is that there's no longer any federal government giving you federal allocation for resources that were collectively gotten and shared. Very important. Secondly, is that they ignore the fact that there is a far much more greater level of independence at various levels. I'm going to be showing you how this is something that we totally ignore and something that is very, very important within this debate. What do you get from this guys? What are that? First thing they tell you is that corruption exists at all levels. I'll show you how corruption is lessened in our world, and even if it isn't lessened, it's still much more better than what you get in our world. The second thing is that we need unity. The most ridiculous thing we get in this debate. We've had unity for over 60 years, since 1960. What the fuck has unity done for Nigeria? Nothing. First thing they tell you, yeah, is that, oh, corruption exists at all levels. Notice, panel, that the only reason why corruption exists is because there's money to spend, right? So the reason why you have corruption at the federal level is because the federal government is most likely depending on getting money from oil, and like mostly oil, because notice that the main source of revenue in the country right now is oil, right? And like the main reason why guys want to steal and all those kind of state government want to like steal is because they know the federal government is most likely going to allocate the resources to you, right? I'm not taking you to my 15 minutes, right? We're going to show you how these guys, one, are much more incentivized to do the right thing, most likely because, one, they no longer have to they no longer have federal allocation to depend on. And two, because they are much more proximate to the people. Notice that the only reason why federal government want to steal, local government or state government want to steal resources is because they know at the end of the federal government is going to send money to you, so you do not necessarily have to look into key issues that ensure that generate revenue as a state or as a local government. This is a problem that we solve in our world. One, you are much more incentivized to lessen corruption and actually do the right thing, because come on, you're controlling just your state government. The idea is that you're most likely going to be known by each and every individual within that state, and you're most likely going to have more access to you and other things. Same thing as the local government and those various municipalities. But let's say corruption still exists. Why are we still very okay with it? Because for corruption to exist, you need money, right? What it means is that to a large extent, you incentivize these guys to actually look into methods that generate revenue for their state. What are you going to steal if you don't have what to steal from, right? It means that to a very large extent, growth is something that you get in our world. Most likely because these states are most likely going to want to survive at the end of the day. Because you don't have federal allocation coming to you anymore. You don't have oil to depend on anymore. You're most likely, your state government and local government are most likely going to look into alternatives like agriculture and all this type of thing. And the biggest thing they tell you is that these guys can't sustain themselves. What the hell are you saying, right? Agriculture exists, human capital exists. There are various ways through which states and local governments can generate revenue to a point that it can cater for their population and can cater for the needs of the state. Because at the end of the day, you need to survive as a state, right? So what you then get is that in Taraba State, the governor of Taraba is no longer looking at expecting federal allocation. So they're most likely going to invest in things like growing yams and all those type of things. What it then means is that as a result of and this is something that will directly address their biggest problem, is that some places are going to develop faster than others, right? Notice that they are still under one structure, meaning that they exist within the same boundaries. What that means is that things like trade and exchange of human capital is much more possible in our world, which means we tackle your issue, because to a very large extent, if you got in a state like Delta has so much money from our resources that it has to itself, it's most likely going to be able to borrow to a state that has much less resources. And look, we have much more of an incentive to pay those loans, most likely because they are held accountable to a much larger extent. Because you limit the control, you limit the level to which these guys are controlled, right? So you don't have the federal government to point fingers to. You're most likely going to do the right thing and develop your state. What is the way and what's the comparative, right? So these guys tell you that their world is better because corruption exists at various levels, right? And we need unity. Unity, that's their biggest case in this debate. What has unity done for the state? What has unity done for Nigeria to a very large extent? At least in our world, we reduce corruption. And even if we reduce it to a marginal level, or we don't reduce it at all, at least we are able to see some level of growth. The comparative is simple, right? Growth versus no growth. Tell me, panel, in which world are the people much more going to be catered for, and in which world is growth assured? Now, what have I been able to show you in my speech, right? First thing, the comparative is better, right? Because their world does not cater for Nigerians in any way. They tell you that giving more powers to the state is harmful, but we'll show you why it's not.
How exactly does the Aya Bello become a better person because people now know he's in charge of everything?
Okay, the idea is simple, right? He's a better person because notice the scope of control is limited to just a certain demography. And he has less powers now, right? Because notice, the incentive to be a bad person is most likely because he has some money somewhere to steal, right? So he knows that the fact he's going to have fat lots of billions coming in from federal allocation and all those type of things. He doesn't have that anymore, right? He's most likely going to, at least, even if he doesn't do it, right, he's most likely going to want to ensure that the people within his state are catered for, even if not for anything, the fact that he is from within that state, right? And secondly, we show you how the level of growth you then end of the day. If you have so much money, you're able to grow to others, you're able to grow. Our world is much more better than what you get in their house.
How stands the member of government for speech? We welcome the member of opposition.
So, Theo, I just put your hand up. I'll eventually get to you. If I look like I'm destabilized, it's because I just dropped my screen like that. Let me try that. Starting in 3, 2, now. The first extension that we have for the closing opposition is our opening to lead CG. Opening opposition tells you that the reason why you have more accountability is because the federation exists in our world to hold the states accountable. The problem with that logic is they do not explain why the federation has any incentive not to be corrupt, as is the status quo. What changes in our world is why you are less likely to have that corruption, or why corruption is much worse in your world. CG says that you're going to have revenue generation. I think that there's a point from Joanne that already counters that. If Borno State suddenly lost all its federal allocation, Boko Haram would immediately overrun it. What it means here is that there are certain things that are a precursor to any form of economic development, like security, when states do not have the financial capacity to even ensure these basic things, their impact don't happen. But again, the problem with their impact is that it relies on people being good people. It relies on good policies being passed. They never prove this. First extension of accountability different from why does accountability exist better in our world? What happens when you have federal policies is that there's a larger scale of impact and there's a larger scale of influence. What exists here is that if the federation is going to make a policy, everybody has an incentive to care about it and look at it because they know that they are directly affected by it. This means that you're more likely to generate critical mass. Critical mass then allows you to push for better policies. 1. 2, allows you to have things like backlash. 2. 3, allows you to collectivize better and have structures that mean that accountability is more likely. This is uniquely going to happen in a world where you have a federal structure. The comparative here is that it is probably easier for one state governor to deal with the sort of backlash that is likely to come from his state than it is for one state governor or even the president to deal with backlash that comes from the entirety of the country, especially because there's significantly more people, 1, or 2, they likely wield significantly more influence. This means that on the comparative, you're more likely to have accountability. But the second reason why you're more likely to have accountability is that when there are more people to buy, it is harder to buy. What does this mean? State capture is easier at a lower level. What this means is that it's probably easier for you to orchestrate state capture when you bribe off everybody in Kwara State, when you take control of things like culture and military and religion within Kwara State, than it is to do within the entirety of Nigeria. This means what happens when you have state capture is that it's often hard for people to even have call-outs in the first place. 1. 2, governmental structures become extremely weak and they cannot call you out. Our world is one where state capture is much harder. Because the amount of time and resources you need to have the entirety of Nigeria, the entirety of the Nigerian political system at your feet is significantly more of a burden than the amount of money and time you need to capture specific states. The reason why this is important is that politicians always have perverse incentives. So they always want to have the most amount of power and they likely want to do this within a reasonable means of time. It means that our world is one where you're more likely to have a responsible political system as opposed to one that is more vulnerable to certain people with power taking over it. The next problem with OO that we are going to hit here is that OO says unification is so important, but they never impact on whether unification is then important. OO assumes that the priority of this debate should be Nigeria as a whole. CG assumes that the priority of this debate should be specific states. OG does a lot of things that my partner would really want to engage. Why is our world better? Because we show you how these things are likely to harm everybody involved. And this co-ops a lot of CG's analysis. Panel, what happens when you have different legislations is that states have every incentive to use regulations and laws and policies as a means by which to attract investment. What this looks like is reducing regulatory barriers so that certain companies can come to your state more. It looks like Kwara State saying, we're not going to tax you as much, so as a company you can come here. Or we're not going to have as much strict enforcement on things like environmental standards or food quality standards as any other state in order to make sure that people come in. Because again, that fulfills the point they want to have. They want to have revenue generation. The easiest way by which states have revenue generation is by reducing, it's two things. Either you increase taxes, but it's unlikely that most states will be capable of doing this, even they don't even have lots of companies, or you reduce things like laws and the policy barrier, which means that more people are likely to then come in. The reason why this is problematic is that not only does it negatively affect the state, so it means that you're more likely to have direct harm to the people here. So if you say that a company doesn't have to pass as many safety standards, that's where they're more likely to have things like abusing worker rights. That's why they're more likely to have things like substandard products. The problem here is that these impacts are not limited to states. So the fact that somebody produces a substandard product in Kwara State doesn't mean it's only Kwara people that are going to consume that product. It likely means that people in Abuja have access to it, people in Lagos have access to it. This means two things. Number one, there is an initial harm on states because they want to drive down the regulatory barriers to fulfill CG's idea of we want to make a lot of money. But two, there's an harm on other states. So even if Kwara State concedes all the negative impacts that are going to happen to it, we don't think that other people should feel the same thing. But three, it is probably harder for you to have that same level of call out because within a federal system, it's very likely that say we call out you as an entire country. Like when we call out people, it's likely the whole country having an incentive to amplify this. What changes here is that people in Lagos are fighting one policy, people in Kwara are fighting an entirely different policy, people in Edo State are fighting an entirely different policy. The intuition from here is that it's probably easier for ASU as a collective body to have bargaining that means that you secure benefits than it is for, say, the staff union of a particular state, like Illinois was for the longest time, to be able to generate those things. Sure,
The problem with your world is that everything you argue exists in status quo without any help coming on. Now, world will show you some level of growth, which tackles Boko Haram.
The world says that Borno State, that currently collects a lot of money from Nigeria, should all of a sudden start fighting Boko Haram on its own without money. Their world is one where you are more likely to have people have policies that don't have as much. Because in our world, given nobody can guarantee what the policies which will be passed in either world will be, our world is better because we tell you how we have more engagement. So it means that you're more likely to